Great. Okay, thanks, everybody. It is February 26th, 4:07. We'll go ahead and call this meeting to order. I'll go through a roll call of planning commission members present. Howard Trix. Joey Edwards.
Here.
Steve Stevens.
Here.
Steve Becker.
Here.
And Jason Marica.
I'm here.
I see them online.
Just
County commissioners, we have Commissioner Much here, Commissioner Marcella. She's online. She was online.
Here.
And Commissioner Pico.
Here.
Any changes or additions to the agenda? Staff has nothing. We have minutes to approve from January 22nd and February 12th. Has the planning commission had time to review those? You have a motion.
Edwards moves to approve the minutes from January 22nd and 12th, 2024.
Have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, aye? Updates from staff?
I think our updates are that March, we have a work session on code amendment for our first meeting. And then later in the month, we have a major subdivision sketch plan. And then we'll be bringing that same code amendment for consideration. So we do have things on both agendas for March.
All right, we'll move down to new business. First item on the new business is appointing the 2024 planning commission officers. I guess we just elected board seats, but we didn't do the officers last meeting. So
Yes, so we have chair, vice chair, and secretary.
Anybody have anything for any of those things?
I would nominate Chair Lind to continue as chair.
Anybody else interested in that? Anybody else interested in vice chair or secretary?
I'd be interested in vice chair.
I don't think the secretary actually is doing anything because we have a beautiful, wonderful CC in our life. Just to be in the line of order, should the chair and vice chair be out, I think the secretary would step in and run the meeting.
No.
You do that? All right, we have nominations for that slate. We can just move to appoint that slate. Okay, so we have a motion on the table for myself as chair, Joey Edwards as vice chair, and Dick Parker as secretary.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Okay, vote aye.
Aye.
I heard an aye from Jason.
Perfect. All right, so now we have the big one, file 24-02, the Land Development Code Amendment for short-term rentals. The way that we'll
Can't hear anyone.
There's no volume. Can anybody hear?
Nope, can't hear anything.
Hmm.
I'm calling in right now to make sure we can get it fixed.
Thank you.
Okay, I think our Zoom is back.
Like we restored it.
Thank you.
Script here, just in case. The Lake County Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners will now conduct a joint public hearing. This statement I operated into and made a part of the record of these proceedings. The Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners have jurisdiction to conduct a joint public hearing on the Land Development Code amendment under section 3.8 of the Lake County Land Development Code. The purpose of this hearing is to consider whether the proposed amendment should be approved. In considering that matter, the Commission will address the approval criteria that are set forth in section 3.8.9 of the Lake County Land Development Code. The procedure to be followed in this hearing will be: 1, county staff will make initial presentation. 2, after that, any persons either supporting or opposing the application may present evidence. Such presentations shall be limited to 2 minutes each. 3, supporting and opposing witnesses may be questioned by the Commission and the Board. Once questioning is concluded, no further questioning is permitted unless granted by the Chair. The parties and witnesses are asked not to submit redundant, irrelevant, or cumulative evidence. If someone has already made the point that you wish to make, please simply say so. The Chair will also require that all comments be made to the Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners, and that there be no dialogue between applicants and/or other members of the audience. At the conclusion of the evidentiary portion of the hearing, the Chair will entertain a motion to close the evidentiary portion of the hearing, and the Commission will discuss and weigh evidence. Then there will be a motion to close the discussion phase of the joint public hearing. The Board of County Commissioners will then leave the meeting, and the Chair of the Planning Commission will entertain a motion on the application. The motion may take the form of one of the following recommendations: approve the application with no conditions, approve application with recommended conditions, approve the application with newly conditions, or deny the application. The Planning Director shall make a record of any substantial discussion on the motion and include that in the record with the recommendation of the Commission. The Commission's recommendation of statement of motion. Are there any objections to the jurisdiction of the Commission or to the form or substance of these proceedings? Okay, hearing none, county staff may make an initial presentation.
Thank you so much. I think it's good to start this evening and just kind of talk about the history and what led up to tonight, because this has been kind of a lengthy process. So in 2022, the moratorium was put in place to allow us time to consider short-term rentals and the potential of some new policy changes. We spent the first part of the moratorium really focusing on compliance, identifying what might be unlicensed and currently occurring in Lake County, and just looking at what was licensed and making sure that it was compliant with the regulations. And so that really took us through the end of 2022. And then into 23, we wanted to host listening sessions. We really wanted to hear from the community, hear what their thoughts were in regard to short-term rentals. And so we hosted those both in Twin Lakes and here in town. And then we started our online comment portal so that we could give the community really an opportunity of an unlimited amount of input, so that they could reach out and they could tell us what they got and their perspective. And we created the community survey and went to our housing partners to kind of help push that out with the housing coalition, and so that we could start really getting some meaningful feedback from the community. And then the next stage that we went into was engagement with our subject matter expert. So we went into engagement with the Economic Planning Systems, or EPS, to really help us look and vet the policies that we were looking to create. And they really helped us focus in on best practices around the state. This is something that's being discussed in the state and in the nation. It's, lots of communities are currently in discussion on short-term rentals. So we really wanted to explore what are the best practices around short-term rentals. And so EPS was really valuable in coming in and just stretching our knowledge base and just making sure that we were really fully vetting this subject. They went through all of that public comment, and then they additionally did stakeholder interviews to really kind of zero in on what did our community feel and think about short-term regulations and the possibility of them. And then in 2024, we hosted another town hall meeting to come forward with our early recommendations on a policy, both EPS and CPD together, so that we really come out and just kind of see if the policy that we were focusing on resonated with the community. And so we took that information back to the drawing board. So tonight is really a culmination of those findings, and that's really what we based this policy recommendation. Tonight, of course, is the public hearing for the code amendment. And so I think I'm going to tell Cece every time I want to change a slide. Is that what I'm going to do? Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. We had some key assumptions when we went into this work. One, that short-term rentals are economic driver in Lake County, and that short-term rentals make up their core component of our lodging inventory. We also had an assumption that we needed to look at and focus on any adverse impacts that were being created by short-term rentals and be mindful of considering a policy that would address those. Next slide. And so our policy considerations, one of the first things that we wanted to look at is where in the county does the housing stock make sense for short-term rentals? There are areas in Lake County that is supportive to our community housing needs and goals. And then we have homes within the community that are a higher price point. They're more expensive to maintain. So there's fuel cost, and there's just overall maintenance. And some of that housing stock doesn't necessarily meet our housing needs, our community housing needs. So we wanted to
We've lost volume again.
We have no volume, guys. Hello?
method upon. We just want to ensure that everyone online can hear us. And we just heard from David. Sounds like
We can hear you now.
Connection with everyone. Okay. So moving forward, we were talking about housing and that we want to consider that there are areas of The housing stock in different areas of the community kind of do address our housing needs as far as workforce housing and community housing. And then there's areas that our housing stock is not as affordable as others. We wanted to make sure that our codes align. We've incentivized ADUs as a way to increase housing opportunities for locals. So we wanted to make sure that we didn't have a contradiction in this new code that didn't continue to preserve that housing stock. And we wanted to also say that there's an opportunity for year-round residents to also realize a benefit from participating in the tourism economy locally. We wanted to consider that there has been speculative buying and speculative purchasing of our housing supplies specific to short-term rentals, and so we wanted to be mindful of that. And then, of course, we'll talk a lot tonight about the environmental impact. So we wanted to make sure that septic systems were being used properly and that we weren't creating any kind of threat to our well or groundwater from contamination from septic systems. A good amount of our housing stock in Lake County is served on well and septic. So next slide. So we have created the community housing overlay. This overlay is designed to be housing that is accessible and affordable. So let's go ahead and take a look at the map. So this will demonstrate the community housing overlay. It's these areas here in light peach, just outside city limits, which includes the West Park area, part of the Coopers and Capitol subdivision, here to kind of this northern part, and then kind of just of the east of the city of Leadville boundary. And then also including our manufactured home communities, which certainly provide primary affordable housing options. So we have the Village of Eastport, Mountain View Village East and West, and then Lakeport manufactured home communities. These areas have accessibility either via transit or they're very walkable for access to food, schools, medical care, and parks. And then the next slide will really demonstrate kind of we're gonna kind of look at median sales price so we can kind of talk about affordability of these areas. You'll notice currently we have 19 licenses in this overlay area. And the only part of the overlay that you're gonna see in this map is the part of the community overlay that actually has any short-term rental licenses. So of that overlay that we just had up on the screen, only this portion has current licensing, and there are 19. The median sales price, as reported by the assessor's office between 2021 through 2023, gave us a median sales price of $390,000 in this area. So it was suggested that we should look at these neighborhoods just on the periphery of the overlay. So if we go to the next slide, we can see just directly outside of the overlay, we have subdivisions like Jim Valley, Matches Estates, Four Seasons, and Silver Hills, and you can immediately see those price points in comparison are significantly different and are higher. So we just wanted to make sure that this evening we kind of highlighted why we chose this area as accessible and more affordable, and an area that we think should be preserved as far as kind of taking a snapshot in time. So currently we have 19 licenses. The proposed regulation would keep standard licenses, and we're going to talk about the difference between a standard and a primary license coming up. But in this area, we would suggest a cap, and that we would stay exactly where we are now, and only if a property were to sell or terminate their license would there be a new license available under one of the two different categories of licensing. This also shows neighborhoods like Mountain Pines, Grand West, near Turquoise Lake, and then near Soda Springs, and then as far south as Dowling Track. And in this area, There are 39 current licenses. And then we just want to kind of give you an idea of generally where else the licenses are originating from currently. So the next slide will show what we refer to as the northern corridor. And this is just along Highway 91 to the north, and we have 12 licenses there currently. The next slide combines the village of Twin Lakes along with Canark subdivision and the EE Hill area. And so between those two areas, we have 57 current licenses. The next slides just kind of divide up those areas. So now you can kind of see the concentration within Canark and then EE Hill. And recognizing that each one of these is a parcel, not a concentration. So every one of the green parcels there, it just represent one license. So the next shows the village of Twin Lakes. Again, it looks like there's a large saturation to the north, but that just shows one parcel with another parcel inside of there. Just to kind of give everyone an idea of kind of where they're naturally licensing at this moment. Our licensing objectives. So we really continue to believe that we need to license them, we need to collect the data, we need to know where they are. And so the licensing is the appropriate way in which to do that. And then we've been talking about differentiating between what we're calling a primary license is one in which it is serving as a primary residence, and a standard license is. And then looking at differentiating location to account for neighborhood impacts like we talked about. Some of our housing stock is on centralized utilities, some is on well and septic. So we just wanted to really kind of look at what are the different impacts associated with different areas. And then realize the impact of speculative investment on the next slide. Primary licenses, so diving into what would be required or associated with a primary license. So obviously, a primary license would be limited to one that could serve as either the owner of the home applying for a license or an approved tenant. So if the property owner were to give permission to the tenant to apply for a license, it could include a tenant as well. Primary licenses would be the only license that would be available for an accessory dwelling unit. And an owner may hold up to 2 licenses. One can be the primary, they have an ADU, and then their primary residence. The primary license would go to the ADU, and then they would have to make sure a standard license would be available, but they could hold up to 2 licenses, a primary and a standard. Primary licenses were not, the policy isn't suggesting a cap. Primary licenses are thought of to allow for some sustainability of local housing. Our next slide talks about standard licenses. Standard licenses then are any other housing that does not serve as a primary residence. In that community overlay area, we are talking about a cap of 19 within that area. Standard licenses would not be available for ADUs. That would contradict the work that we have done through our DOLA planning grant to increase community housing, where we've incentivized ADUs as an option for affordability and workforce supportive housing. We would only allow 1 standard license per parcel. Other situations that they would be licensed under a conditional use permit. There's other situations like group camps and vacation lodges and such, where there might be more than 1 lodging opportunity on a parcel, but again, we're talking about standard short-term rental licenses. So only 1 per parcel, and an owner, being it an individual or a company, would be limited to 2 licenses. That's that thought of limiting speculative investment just for the purpose of securing or potentially depleting housing supply within Lake County for simply being used as short-term rental. So this would limit 2 licenses per owner or individual or company. This doesn't include, of course, management companies. They're not the owner. So we're talking about owners that hold title in either individually or in like an LLC. And this is the only type of license that we've put out for kind of consideration on capping standard licenses. Next slide. License requirement, at renewal, we want to make sure that these licenses are being used. We don't want people to apply for the license and just kind of sit on them, kind of defeats the whole reason for having the licensing in the first place. So we do have a minimum of 14 days. During our work session, we had a little bit of discussion of thinking maybe we should increase this amount of nights, because there was kind of a little bit of erroneous information in thinking that at 14 days you didn't have to collect sales and lodging tax. And that is not the case. Sales and lodging taxes due regardless. It's just whether or not you have to file a tax return on your amount of income. So after reviewing this with our legal counsel and with our subject matter expert, EPS, we arrived at 14 days did seem the most equitable, and realizing that our peak visitation and number of lodging days per year isn't as robust as some communities. 14 seem more in line. So again, it's meant to make sure that the standard licenses are being used. We don't want anyone just holding them. The new regulation would not allow the license to be transferable at sale or transfer of title. This was artificially inflating the sales price. We discovered when properties could be sold that had a short-term rental, was kind of a have-not, and there wasn't a lot of equity in that. So these licenses would not be transferable on sale or transfer of title. And then this is just kind of a housekeeping, safety issue that we came across in some situations. So the code requires a 24-hour contact, but we've expanded that 24 hours, 7 days a week, that can be there within an hour, who has authority to address an issue. So if we're having to contact someone on a short-term rental, be it, normally it's always an emergency situation, we not only want somebody that can respond, but has authority to address whatever the issue of the property is. Next slide. And then that really arrives at our focus on the environment, health and safety. And so occupancy limits over maximizing a property can have a plethora of different adverse impacts. And no little of which is to the septic system. And that's when we see problems with problems to septic systems that are costly, problems for the property can increase to the environmental concerns for neighborhoods and areas. So occupancy limits would be based on the septic design. And then if properties were on centralized utilities, this is the regulation that the city has, and it would mirror that of 2 people per bedroom, plus 2 to accommodate those sleeper sofa situations. So we decided, wherever we could find an opportunity to align the 2 communities, like in Lake County, or short-term rental regulations, we really see a benefit there in having kind of a universal policy for the community. Septic system cleaning inspection, so it is routine and recommended for property owners to clean their septics every 3 to 5 years. On a cycle, we are suggesting that this on short-term rental should be done every 3 years. So this is the normal recommendation for how you maintain your septic system, whether it's a short-term rental or not. This way we can make sure that the systems are operating, being cleaned and inspected, and we can address problems early if they're occurring. And again, the thought is that this is a normal maintenance cycle recommended for homeowners. That short-term rentals that are on septic systems would have to, at the time of renewal, show that they are having their septic systems cleaned and inspected on a 3-year cycle. The fire safety check, this is something that is a program that's already been administered in the city by the fire marshal. And so we would just look to bring this into the Lake County policy as well. The fire marshal comes out and makes sure that the safety monitoring devices are in the property and they're working, like carbon monoxide, fire alarms, smoke detectors. You'll also do things like look and make sure that sleeping rooms have proper egress, making sure that gas meters are properly protected from ice falling off the roof and gas line or being compromised when ice falls off the roof and we could possibly have a gas leak. Looks at appliances like hot water heaters and furnaces, just with an eye for safety. And so this just ensures that we are, again, promoting life safety within short-term rentals, and a practice that we'd like to mirror after what's being already done in the city. We would look to suggest that those need to be done on a 3-year cycle as well. And then most recently, last week, the Board of Health passed new septic regulations. And they included this short-term requirement of cleaning and inspecting, but it also looked and considered seepage pits. Seepage pits are no longer allowed in Lake County, but they are a practice that was in place previously, and some of our housing stock certainly does have seepage pits. This new requirement through Regulation 43, which you won't see the specifics of in the zoning code, but we want to bring it to your attention because Regulation 43 will require homeowners a period of time, they'll have until 2026, to address what might need to be done with their seepage pit. There's several different options. Normally it's pre-treatment before the effluent goes into the seepage pit, so it would be a higher level of treatment. And so pre-treatment can be one method by which you can address seepage pits. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail other than that, than talking about tonight that we do have support for homeowners. David Wilson, our environmental health specialist, is prepared, is already, if you're one of these owners, I know you've already received communication from him. He's going to continue to provide you guidance on how to kind of shepherd you into the new regulations. There's also an opportunity to have an engineer review your system and help you make a determination that potentially that modification may not be needed. I think that may not be as an option that could be readily used often, but it may be an option for some. And then another thing that we really heard from public comment was that we wanted to further the work of the wildfire mitigation planning that's being done. And so we wanted to make sure and prohibit outdoor fires, outdoor wood fires. Grills and the like would still be, propane grills would still be allowed, but we're looking for those things that create sparks. And so we want to protect neighborhoods. We heard a lot of community in neighborhoods very concerned about uncontrolled outside fires. And I'm going to take just a break and make sure that we're still on track. You're still on, I'm just on. Oh, okay. I'm so sorry. No, you're fine. Sorry, everyone. I promise, I think I'm almost more than halfway done. And then it'll be a little bit easier when we don't have a presentation to engage. Okay, great. It's just really weird.
And I can't tell if it's sharing or not. Can we just check the Zoom to see that? Do we know if there's any camera people up there anymore? I was like that, so.
I wondered if given the small size of the group here, if you have to restart it again, would it make sense to put it back downstairs? I think that would be better access than what we did in this room.
I would say that we're just about,
Unless you're,
we're
yeah.
almost done. Actually, we only have,
Just
I
concerned
think,
with
4 more slides. We only have 4 more slides. Yeah, we only have,
If you're on Zoom right now and you can hear us, would somebody unmute and let us know you can hear us and if you can see the share screen?
it looks like you can see the screen.
I can see
We
your
can, we can
PowerPoint.
hear, we can hear
Okay,
and see you.
Okay,
Okay, great, I think we're back.
okay. Next slide. I will go a little quicker.
You might have to do it.
Okay, so, education, we don't want to downplay, this is, this is, something that we really received a lot of feedback on, about really educating, the renters that come into the community that are, renting the units. And so we want to make sure that we're giving them good guidance. So the department, as part of our licensing, we're going to create these do's and don'ts for septic systems that can be placed in the home. They can be placed in the kitchen and the primary bathroom, to educate a lot of renters have never even dealt with septic systems. They don't know what can and can't be put down them. If you have a septic system and you are renting your property, you probably are very cognizant of this. We just want to make sure that universally septic systems are being supported in the proper usage. There is a good neighbor guide that's being developed through tourism, which will really help just provide a wealth of information about how to engage in the wilderness, how to keep from trespassing on your neighbor's property, how to just be a good visitor in Leadville and Lake County. And so when that publication is finished and done, we will make sure that that is available to, and make sure that those get into the short-term rental homes. And then the code talks about, and we are going to furnish them cards that talk about the prohibition about outdoor fires, information on wildlife, proper trash and promoting recycling, parking, what is the parking plan at the property, and then just best practices. So we really want to do kind of an education piece. We want to educate property owners. Many of the property owners are intimately aware of these things, but we just want to make sure that the visitors to Lake County are also very mindful of them as well. This leads into probably one of the biggest talking points. You're gonna have to change yours, Ann. Oh, sorry, that's already, yeah, it is changed. I'm on cap discussion.
I think it's just not catching up. I mean, do we care about it being this big view and not just share screen the other view?
Yeah, as long as I can kind of talk through it. There, okay. So this leads to the CAP discussion, and this was published online. I know this has been a big talking point for the community, and I will say that one of the reasons that staff, a tool that we really wanted to kind of illustrate a point was that the CAP, we saw a lot of movement in A, a lot of movement in C, and not a lot of movement in B. And staff would suggest that that emphasizes the need to kind of bring a compromise to the middle and bring a more balanced approach. That's something that's been at the bottom of all of the slides, but really wanted to talk about, that we really wanted to consider a balanced approach to the outcome of the regulations. So option one is very predictable. It considers that when we started the moratorium, we had 127 licenses, and that would be keeping standard licenses at 127. And there would be no cap on primary licenses and no new standard licenses in that community housing overlay unless one was sold or terminated or not renewed. So if one of those happened, then a standard license would come available in the community housing overlay. That represents about 4.7% of the total housing units in Lake County. Option B considers some growth. It looks to a pure example of the city of Leadville with 171 current short-term licenses. They have a couple different tiers, but that does show the licenses that are capped. They don't cap all of their licenses. And so this would look like, what if we put the two jurisdictions side by side? What would that look like? So that would suggest a growth of up to 170. Again, no cap on primary and no new standard in community housing overlay until we lost one. And that would represent about 6.3% of the total housing units in Lake County. And option C is to consider the regulation, septic systems, and all of the other, fire safety inspections and all of the other rules and regulations associated with short-term rentals are sufficient, and there shouldn't be any cap on short-term rentals. Next slide. So we wanted to say, what does that look like with our neighbors? Are we real disproportionate to what the other communities in the state look like? So the top are a group of counties, and then the bottom are a group of municipalities. And kind of where do we align? And you can see immediately under either option A or B, if there was a cap, we wouldn't be overly disproportional to other communities within the state. So we're still, right in kind of what we see going on in other communities. The new regulations and implementation. So we will be taking this recommendation chooses today. We will be taking your recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners for decision on Wednesday, which coincides with the expiration of the moratorium. But we have considered within the administration of these regulations some ways in which to support currently licensed properties to make sure that they have adequate time or consideration of time to come in under these new regulations. So the fire safety check, you'd have it approximately be currently licensed 10 months to engage with the fire marshal and schedule the appointment for him to do the walkthrough. For septic inspection and cleaning, up until you renew for 2026, we would allow pumping reports and cleaning as old as 5 years old instead of that 3-year cycle. So if someone has one of those, we would consider those. There are some other considerations within the code for extenuating circumstances. We recognize that we don't have an overwhelming amount of pumping and inspection companies currently registered in Lake County, so there is some consideration in the administration. And then seepage repairs. If you did end up in one of those situations where you needed a major repair, you would have until 2026 to determine how best to address that. So there is some room within the administration of these new regulations to allow new, our property owners that are currently licensed to come into compliance. And that is all that staff has, unless there are some questions from the planning commission or the board for staff.
Can we just leave Zoom up there then? We'll start with if there are any quick questions from the planning commission before we take public comment. Or planning commissioners.
And could you remind us, I was curious to revisit, why that overlay wasn't expanded to like the Eagles Nest area or the Mount Wilson, Mount Evans area? That seems like a similar, housing stock,
It is not
similar
necessary.
down. Oh,
It
is
does
down
include,
that
it
area.
includes all filings 1, 2, 3, and 4 of West Park.
Okay,
So it does
okay,
include those
I couldn't
areas.
see
And
that on the
Eagles-
map, I
Eagles-
thought.
Yeah, Eagles Nest would not, they would be short-term renting, but yes, it is all 4 filings of West Park.
Okay, and then maybe just remind us why, there wasn't, it's not suggested that any subdivisions along County Road 17 or 4 would be included in that?
Again, it was the price point, so the comparison of the median sales price in those areas, we were at 390, and the community housing overlay, and I think the lowest median that we had within, and those were, so all of those subdivisions were on County Road 17 that we used as comparison. And Silver Hills, I think, had the lowest median at 480, so it's almost a whole K over what the affordability is within the housing overlay. So it was a significance, both then they're not as walkable, they're not as accessible, and the price point was considerably different. But some of those, like Jim Valley, shows 621, and we had a considerable different price point in those areas. We also don't see as high a concentration as we do. 19 within that area is the higher concentration than we're seeing in those other areas too. So kind of a combination of both.
Real quick on the renewal process, is this something that's similar to kind of like ends every calendar year? And the fire safety checks happen annually?
Every 3 years for the fire safety check.
Fire safety checks every 3 years, okay, and then, but every year, they just have to submit their, application for renewal.
Correct.
And I feel like a lot of what comes out of this is complaints on inappropriate use and things like that. Can you, tell us a little bit more about how that complaint process gets handled?
Absolutely. So if we receive a complaint on a short-term rental, the first thing that we do is do an administrative investigation before we would refer it for consideration. But under the code, so first we would try to come to a resolution administratively. And then if we were unable to gain compliance, sometimes it's an education situation where, we had a situation and we've had a renter, it's a one-off kind of a situation, and so we'll try to work through that administratively. If we're unable to do that, the code allows us to refer these to a short-term rental license to the Board of County Commissioners for a show cause hearing, at which time it is a public hearing where there's due process. We bring the complaint forward, the evidence surrounding the complaint, and then the property owner would have their opportunity to come forward and bring their evidence to suggest that they were compliant or halfway forward to compliance. The board has a couple different opportunities. They can, they could put the license on probation for a bit. They could eventually end up at a revocation situation if the license was ever revoked, which does not happen in between American and the county. But if it was revoked, there would not be the ability to reapply for 2 years. So, but we do handle things administratively first. Sure. There's one other thing that I think, I apologize, I'm trying to be cognizant of how wordy and our technical difficulties, but I think it's really important to note that currently, when we started the moratorium, we were at that 127. We with a lot of effort put behind trying to get everyone to renew during this grace period. We currently only have 118 licenses that have renewed. And we recently went out to just try to see if we could decipher what of our existing licenses would be considered primary under this, and we have 12. So we have about close to 20 licenses immediately that would be available under, if we limited it at 127. So I think it was just kind of good also to just let you know where we are currently in the amount of licenses that we have and what kind of availability we would have from the get-go. We also didn't really talk about waitlisting, but we would have a singular place submittal portal online so that we can verify time of receipt and so that we can waitlist applications until licenses would become, if we ever end up in a wait list situation. So we do talk about that in the policy draft that you have on how we would manage waitlisting if that became, if we realized that within the policy. And if there's one other current situation, this is only speculation at this point, but there is speculation that one of our current purpose-built lodging or our current hotel motel uses may be repurposing to workforce housing. And this is a hotel motel that currently has 65 units. That might be repurposed into workforce housing. So that is talked about in the staff report that was included on the file. So just kind of a current, again, it's just speculation, and we don't have that application yet.
Can we disable chat? The way that this will work for you guys on Zoom is we will, once we go to Zoom public comment, you can have the opportunity to raise your hand and I will call on you. If you are on Zoom right now and your full name or the name, your name that's showing up is not your actual name, can you please correct it, add your full name to that so that we have that for public record? And we'll start with folks in the room first that wish to make comment. Again, we're gonna ask everybody to limit themselves to 2 minutes. We don't transfer time to each other. Like I said, we'll start with folks in the room and then I'll go ahead and ask Zoomers to go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to, and I can call on you from there. Just a reminder, I think everybody's got the best intentions here. Let's keep it cordial and awesome. And if somebody's already made your point, feel free to still make the comment that that's your point. But we'll try to keep this smooth sailing. Go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, I just wanted,
Yeah.
sorry, I can sit up closer to front. I just wanted to see if that, on the option sheet, the number chosen, if you could maybe comment a little bit more on sort of where the staff report, so the underlying rationale or some of the pros and cons of where this staff report shows that option B higher cap. It seemed like from this what tied to the potential number, or happens to be very close to the potential number of units lost in the motel might convert. But again, just curious on sort of the rationale, pros and cons for choosing that higher number in B compared to A.
Absolutely. So yes, in the staff report, just the draft policy, kind of modeled where the city of Lakeville is. And you kind of hit the nail on the head. The staff report is something that wasn't included in the presentation, does consider the possibility of losing 65 minutes of lodging within the community. And so that would then represent, kind of a direct correlation to that loss to the increase Based on staff's best estimation and the degree of interest that we've been receiving in the outcome of the policy, our estimates would not believe that these additional licenses would fill up quickly. We believe, again, these are guesstimates, but based on kind of where we think we are and just gauging the amount of interest, we do think 20 units would, 15 to 20 might see the increase that we see after the moratorium's lifted on standard licenses. But increasing to the 170, that arrives at about 62 additional licenses that would be open for standard. So the table within the staff report just, kind of shows and illustrates kind of the difference between option A and option B. The available licenses being around 19 to 20 under option A and around 62 for option B. But again, there is that discussion about what the impact might be of losing some purpose-built lodging units.
Okay, so are county, any other questions from planning commissioner, county commissioners before we do public comment? Okay. For folks here in the room, I have 5 of you signed up. Anybody else that came in that did not have an opportunity to put their name on here and would wish to speak this evening? Everybody's signed up on here? No. Guys, were you guys meeting something? Is that what you, no?
It's just a
Yes.
It's actually fine, but if you need it, you're welcome to borrow it.
Okay, first on the list, we have Mark, and I examine.
Yes. Good evening, I'm Mark Zemmer, and I represent Grand West Village Homeowners Association. This is separate from Grand West Village Resort. About 2 years ago, the developer and declarant of that property informed us he would no longer be managing that. So our 12 owners, formed an HOA in accordance with the Colorado Common Interest Act. And now we manage and regulate all of Grand West. We've been doing short-term rentals for approximately 25 years. And as listening to the planning boards, the planning meetings and the work sessions, a lot of your best practices we employ. We have our septic tanks on a regular schedule. Our water is tested in-house weekly, sent to the state quarterly. We have a moratorium between rentals to allow for cleaning, which allows for the septic tanks to filter out. A variety of your best practices are employed. Our main concern is the cost of having to switch septic systems. In the presentation, David Wilson presented one style of system that was $20,000 for the unit itself. My research indicates that labor is 3/4 the cost of replacement of the system. So we're looking at $50,000 to replace our system that we've been using for 25 years without difficulty or problems. It also has been mentioned that there would be a possibility that if you had an engineer attest to the working system, that it was not causing an environmental hazard, that perhaps that could result in some sort of exemption or waiver. And I wonder if it's possible to amend the regulations to give us some better assurance that instead that might be a possibility, that perhaps something like that could be put in writing or put into the regulations, so that after we go through the expense of an engineer, get the reports, it shows that we're in compliance. Is there something that gives us assurance that is going to be good enough? So that's my main concern. Maybe others have different views, but that's the point I would like to make.
Thank you. Heather, can I ask you that? Just-
Yes, go ahead.
So Mark, at the planning commission, and on the zoning change, they don't have authority over the, septic regulations. However, that regulation, that we're talking about, where can evaluate the system, that's a state of Colorado, Reg 43, and so it's already in place.
Yes, and could that possibly be cited in your rules and regulations? If you're in accordance with Reg 43, that would be sufficient for what you're looking for here.
Those, management of that would be over the Board of Health, is the board that has authority over that. And, so.
And would that
we can
ultimately?
cer-
So as we have stated here, some requirements for a license, the fine print would be that you were approved by public health, not that we are deciding what your septic system looks like.
Something that gives us more than this department does it, that department does it, it's a state. I don't know if the commissioners ultimately, the county commissioners have a role in this, but instead of being bounced around, if it in fact is meeting all the standards, then some assurances that we could proceed. So that's a more clarification. It's not clear in either the planning meeting, the public hearing that we had, and whether what that is. In fact, I don't think the regulations even cite 43.
Now-
So unless you know that is where to look for it, you wouldn't know that that's even a possibility.
So our regulation, so the regulation that we're hearing today, just calls for, compliance with the subject regulations as, which would then be, the public health signs off approving it. So the regulation that has, authority over the septic system is the Lake County Reg 43, which is an amendment to the state regulation, and under the state, that's where you have that exception. So it exists, and it's overseen and administered by the Board of County Commissioners, but in their capacity as the Board of Health.
So maybe a cleaner way to say this is that today, it's section, or it's, regulation 43. In here, that could be something else. So what she's saying is that what we're hearing tonight, if we pass one of these option A, B, or Cs, and the septic regulation piece is in there, what it's saying, what our tonight code is gonna say, is that you're getting signed off by public health, that your septic is in compliance. Whatever public health's rules are at the time is what your septic has to meet. Does that make more sense?
Right.
So
And
we
if
aren't,
we- if we
this
meet
code
the
won't
rules.
have anything to do with what your regulation has to be for septic. Public health will always have that regulation and determination. Ours will just say that you have to be in compliance,
So if we meet public health regulations,
and they sign off on it.
because in both the work session and here, we may look at that, the whole main part gives us pause.
Yeah, no, what we're trying to
I'm not
say
trying to
is,
be confrontational, frankly.
yeah, what we're trying to say is public health has regulation over that, so they're going to be the ones that decide that, and that could be a managed situation, I guess, with them, but on our end, we don't manage the septic system liability.
And one last question for me. I know the inspectors are approved, Lake County approved. Can we employ any licensed engineer that is familiar with regulation 43 with the state? Or does it have to be an
It'd be a
engineer
public
that's
health.
approved by
It has just a Colorado engineer.
just a Colorado engineer? So we can employ our own. Okay, thank you.
Richard Green.
Yeah, that's me. I'm also with Graham West. I own a unit out there. I've owned it for about 10 years. And Mark said it all that I needed to say, so I won't take much time. You have to understand that if, and I know that you have no jurisdiction over the health department, but you could be losing several licenses in the community if you want to keep the licenses at Grand West. It may be a problem because our septic system is 25 years old. It was built to last 50 years. And so we're halfway through our life span. We expect it to go another 25 years. But if we have to significantly upgrade that system at a significant cost, I, as an owner, probably are not gonna, I make $5,000 a year by renting it. I'm not gonna spend 30 grand to upgrade the system. So you may be losing some licenses, not only from Graham West, but several other places where the septic tank is not up to date. And I know that's not your jurisdiction, but it will impact you eventually. Of those 127 licenses you have, I assume all 127 have a septic tank on them, because they're all in the county. No?
No, there's several subdivisions that are sewer.
Significant number of them?
I believe that we have 17. For sure on, see which one. So 86.
We represent about 5 or 6 of them. Grand West has 4 buildings and there are 6 systems. So we represent a significant number of the units that you have the license, that has a short-term license. And I mean, I can't speak for any other owner, but because those 17, if you're voting on one of these options and you're trying to keep it in the county, this would be a way to eliminate. I don't know that you want to eliminate any, but this would certainly be a way that you may eliminate some by putting an undue burden on the septic tank requirement. I assume you have to have the septic tank requirement in your, it doesn't really have to be in there, period, does it?
So the regulation just says that it has to be approved by public health. So it, again,
We're back to
the
43.
planning commission doesn't,
I understand.
but I would suggest, reaching out to David. I think he already has reached out, and, oh, he's right behind you. But we're not gonna do that in this meeting.
I
No,
understand.
we're-
I understand. And I'm sure my 2 minutes are up. But
So, I do, he is a resource and he can absolutely help you, kind of navigate.
again, my only reason to bring that up is the significant cost is may forfeit some licenses because it won't make sense to keep a license. And that might alter the vote that you made on A, B, or C, because if you're going for a certain number of units or whatever the cap is or the limit is, it may be altered by that significant factor. So that's me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dorothy Martinez.
I guess my concern's pretty easy, I guess. You talked about the verification, well, not the verification, the primary licenses that are gonna be uncapped through the county. I believe the last public comment meeting recommended that they just fill out an affidavit form, and that was it. I'm just wondering if we can elaborate a little bit more on that and request additional information, so that way we don't see all these new primary residences pop up. Examples would be proof of working in the county of 30 hours, W-2 tax, your tax paperwork, you have a PO box here, voter registration, motor vehicle licenses, just things like that, so we can verify. I hate to see that somebody's gonna say, yes, I live here, and by signing that. The last public hearing, there was a gentleman who said, if that's all it takes to be a primary resident, then I'm just gonna sign it. There's a lot of dishonest people, and I hate to say it, I'm not saying I'm against them, but I'd like to see some more regulation on it. One of the other things that I think that would help, the rental records request upon, well, I guess, as you get audited, you just want to check on primary rentals. Let's ask them for the records to see how many months they're going to be renting. Enforcement, my other question is, enforcement citations for those that are renting without a license. I believe I may have 1 or 2 in my subdivision. I'd like to know how those are going to count. The fines, the citations, court summons, fire pits. I'm glad that you all have addressed the fire pit concern. I guess the other concern that I would have is a lot of folks, and I do remember the BOCC had a meeting on this and allowed for gas fired pits outside. Okay, so that's fine, but if these folks want to have gas fired pits on a covered deck, are they going to be approved to be on that? You don't want a combustible appliance on a covered porch. I don't want my subdivision water in flames. I think that was pretty much it. I guess my primary concern is the primary resident license that are not capped and the influx that I think we can see. And I just want to know how's that going to be addressed.
That, the policy, we didn't put it in a slideshow, but the policy already has, where you have to provide, method of proof of primary. So it's a copy of your tax return, voter's registration, driver's license, and you have to have 2 forms of proof. So it's already in the policy.
It's just 2 forms of proof. Do you think it would be good to add more? I'm just curious.
The policy is written with the affidavit that they affirm to it, so there's a legal basis, and then 2 forms of verification of primary.
Okay, is that going to be monitored as well at the end to see how many new applications we get as primary? I'm sure this can be revisited year after year, but I just want to see if there's a difference.
It's an annual renewal,
Okay.
so you have to have the same, you have the same requirement annually.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
Adam Christopher.
Hey, so I just wanted to comment on the cap for the option A and just a few comments on it. I think it's a little low on the option A, but there's a big gap between A and B. And it's important to acknowledge that Lake County is driven by a lot of tourism, and short-term rentals are a big part of that. So I'm curious if there's anything that has been discussed about maintaining that percentage of housing over time. So like, in 3 years, when there's more houses built, more housing available, is that going to be readjusted so the cap can raise accordingly with percentages? And
Perhaps a percentage instead of a new or a whole cap.
yeah, so I was just thinking about that, and I'm not the only one that's concerned about the current cap staying. It just seems a tad low. And along with that, I was curious about the 14-day minimum. Is that just for the primary, or is that for the standard, or both?
It was for both.
Okay, so
So
to
that
me,
somebody's using their license, right? They're not just keeping a license
Correct.
just in case.
correct. So to me, that makes a lot of sense for the primary.
Mhm.
But for a standard license, if you're going to the trouble of running a business, 14 days seems like a hobby. So I'm a business owner, I run my business, and I run it more than 14 days, no problem. So I'd like to see that cap, or the minimum, a little higher, just to encourage people that are actually using their properties as short-term rentals, because it can get bogged down, right? Like the cap can be eaten up by the people who are barely using it, right? So that would be another part of that cap discussion. Anyway, so that's it.
Thank you. Kyle Spencer.
Sure. Well, I have a couple of concerns. I realize this is, it's been a time consuming and difficult issue for you folks, and not easy. I guess regarding the caps and the speculative investing in the county, I guess my question would be, with no caps on the primaries, which I'm kind of in support of the primary owners, but with no caps on them, I think that may encourage speculative investing in the county, to become an owner in the county where you can hire a tenant to be there, or basically allow that tenant to live there and then they have two licenses all of a sudden if they choose to. You know, one for their primary, and if they have an ADU, or I believe that's the proper term, you know, a secondary structure. So I'm wondering if you have, I mean, I'm getting that you have, maybe don't have that many primary licenses right now in the county. So I can understand maybe not capping them, but I'm just wondering about in the future of where that may lead. That could be a little bit problematic at some point down the road. I suppose you can revisit it at some point or change that, but it's always hard to go back at some point. So I'm not sure how you deal with that one, but I could see that one becoming some sort of an issue. As far as the total cap, I mean, obviously I prefer the standards to remain at, where there was going to be 127 now. I mean, if you didn't go up, there would still be 127 plus the primaries. And then I was just wondering if there was ever any investigation into a tier or something of how many nights. I don't even know if you have any way to access this. Maybe it's none of your, you know, you can't do it, but how many nights per year a licensee has their property rented out? Because I know there's some that are probably rented out that are standard license, probably in excess of 300 nights a year.
That's not a normal. The majority, the high end, the majority are 70 to 80 nights a year. And that's ones that are occupied pretty significantly. The average rental is 50 nights a year. And that's
all. Okay.
It's a lot lower than people think it is. And that number comes from that my company used to manage short-term rentals over a year ago.
Okay.
And we managed the majority of them in the county. And our best rental rented 76 nights a year.
Well, my point on that was maybe the lodging tax or whatever it is, something like income tax could be based on how many, have a tier system, just like your income tax brackets or whatever, of more nights you use, your tax bracket may be slightly higher.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Remind us again.
So,
12.
I have Susan Bros.
No comment.
No? Okay, and Hope. I'm gonna switch us over to Zoom. If you can use the little, forget what you do on the bottom there to raise your hand. I can go ahead and start calling on folks who wish to say anything. First one I see up there is Casey Wallace.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Sorry, Casey, hang on just a second. We can't hear you yet, so let me see if we've got to fix it.
Just to turn it on the bottom right on the computer.
There you go.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, Casey, can you try now?
Can you guys hear me?
No. Nope, just a minute. One more try.
okay, now can you try?
How is it going? You hear me now? Awesome. Hey, thanks everybody. So I just had a quick question. I'm sorry I didn't catch the front end. I was trying to get home from work to get on here. So I guess, and Ann, you might have answered it quickly there. I want to know if we could get any numbers on the pent up demand that has been out there with a 2-year moratorium on it. And then, you know, it sounds like you have a rough idea of what that would be for the standard licenses, that you would have 20 available, and you think those 15 to 20 would go out fairly quick. And I know everybody can only come at these things from their own situation. So this is mine. You know, my family and I are in a couple different stages of building a place up there. And we've done everything by the rules and the county regs and all that. And I would like to get a standard license. So I would just think that it's a little counterproductive a little counterproductive to already have gotten rid of those licenses at a cap level. If it's really, you're really not gaining anything. I hope that makes sense, but, yeah, I guess that would be my comment, just that the cap might be too low, given I don't know what the number is on pent up demand, but if you could provide any information on that, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey.
Peter Day, I have you next.
Hey, can you hear me?
Can hear you.
Great. Peter Day, 27 Daisy Drive. I'm largely in favor of the proposed code changes and compliment county staff and its consultants for their work. I want to highlight two issues. First issue is on the cap. I had previously commented that if a standard license cap of 170 was approved, that increases above 127 should be tied to progress in achieving housing goals. The BOCC is working towards affordable housing so that county workers, teachers, nurses, first responders, and private sector workers can afford to live in Lake County. Those efforts should not be thwarted by increases in STRs that offset long-term housing opportunities. It would be a challenge to determine the appropriate ratio of new STRs to new housing opportunities, but it certainly deserves consideration. Alternatively, a simpler approach would be to establish a standard license cap of 170 or some other number like 175, and then work incrementally over time to increase from the current number of standard licenses to the established cap. Starting at the 2024 baseline of 109, increase the number of standard licenses by 11, that's 10% annually, until the new cap is met. It would take 6 years to reach a cap of 175. Increasing from 109 to 175 is a 61% increase, which is pretty big. For planning purposes and potential mid-course corrections, there must be some type of incremental increases. No way can our tender housing market absorb a 61% STR license increase all at once. In this regard, there needs to be some long-term planning with the ability to halt annual increases if the housing market becomes stressed. My second issue has to do with violations and penalties. Section K.5 allows an owner the right to appeal a permit denial at show cause hearing. The Board of County Commissioners may wish to consider whether it wants to be the body to hear appeals of permit denials. If so, what are the criteria that the BOCC would use to determine whether the appeal is valid? The proposal does not provide any. I'd suggest that the BOCC would need to find that CPD somehow erred in its denial decision or its denial was arbitrary or capricious. I recommend beefing up section K5 to include the criteria that the BOCC would apply to uphold or overrule the permit decision. I think that's it. Thank you. Thank you for your consideration.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, do we have who has a comment or would like to speak? I just need a hand raised. Sorry, I can't read that. Dell?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So just a couple of questions. And number one, I would like to applaud this group for really doing a good job of putting a lot of data together. Just a job well done. My first question would be, in the case of title passing via a will or a family member wanting to turn, over to their son, daughter, child, something like that, a consideration in the regs to do that versus saying you have to go to the back of the line in case there's a legacy transfer of title due to death or some other reason for them to pass the title. The second question I have, I think it was somewhat addressed, but I'm not sure how it was going to be incorporated, was by subdivision or subcategory, as you had outlined in the overlay, of doing certain percentages of short-term rentals. Some areas are going to be low, some areas are just natural for short-term rental type things. So is there any consideration to cut the pie up into different, sizes, slices, if you will? The third issue I wanted to address was what Mark was talking about, was the septic tank. The proposal 1.13 that was issued after Tuesday's meeting is out. And I think the section that I know several of us are concerned about, leach pits, is the D2 exception, and putting some meat behind that, exactly how is an exception going to be granted. So, and I would assume David, he may be able to address that, but my guess would be that the Health and Environmental Board is going to start putting some details around how you'll be able to apply for that exception. And my last point is, there was a question about Colorado versus Lake County approved persons for the septics. 1.13 in the regs does say it has to be Lake County. I think it would be appropriate to expand that out to a licensed Colorado person involved in septic and sewer. Those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doug. Do I have anyone that would like to make public comment this evening? Hearing none, we can probably close the public comment portion of the public hearing. And with that, comments and questions.
Can I actually add, clarify? I'm not sure I got that last public comment by Dell, the second point of cutting up the pie.
Del, would you mind coming on, explaining your second comment in subdivision categories, percentage of short-term rentals for kind of the pie piece?
Yeah, Ann, did you want me to address it or did you answer it?
I didn't hear your comment.
Or clarification, what comment you were making.
Well, early on in the presentation, you talked about one of the kind of geographically designed overlay sections that you did, and you talked a lot about the average sales price of that house and how it made sense to kind of keep that, you know, the percentage of short-term rentals, kind of freeze that. So as I looked at the different overlays, you know, Twin Lakes, Panarch, Ross, some of the other subdivisions, they were all at various percentages. And my question or comment was, is there consideration saying, you know, some areas maybe you can go up to 10%, and other areas, as you defined in that very first area that was is kind of buried inside of the Leadville lines, maybe you say that has to be capped at X because of it's unnatural to be, you know, places where people have affordable housing. So does that explain it?
Yeah, thank you. I think that clarifies it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go ahead and close the public comment portion. Hey Sam, we're back. All right. Anyway, I feel like this process, although it's long and arduous, like you guys have done a really good job of gathering information and keeping the community informed, and it's super grateful for you guys. So thank you for managing this all for us. a couple of things, just, you know, I have a lot of experience in this realm over the last 24 years that I've been here. 23 of those, well, running a real estate company in town, and lots and lots of those years managing. Mitigating the impacts is my biggest concern. And I think that a lot of the regulations that are proposed here, regardless of A, B, or C, really help to try to mitigate those. One thing I would love to see a little bit more weight in, and I think Peter Day kind of touched on this as well, is I think where a lot of frustration comes is, how do we complain about somebody not operating correctly? What are the consequences for that, you know? And it is right now, it's because fortunately we haven't had a ton of this. It's a little gray even to me as far as where the 3 strike you're out kind of deal should be, because if somebody
We've lost volume again.
Yeah, we lost audio.
I did just send them a text to try to fix the audio and the volume.
Thank you.
So I don't know what happened there, but I was just
All right.
unmuting the mic so people could be on the Zoom.
Hopefully I'm not yet. One of the things that I wasn't prepared for, that was what I think is an unintended consequence of the moratorium over the last year and a half or 2 years, however long it's been now. What I've seen in the real estate market is that with the cap being met in the city and then the moratorium in the county, I'm still selling all these houses to second homeowners. I'm just selling it to these second homeowners. I'm not selling it to these second homeowners anymore. I do not, and I believe very strongly in this, that this is, any kind of cap is not going to produce workforce housing. I don't believe that it will. I feel very strongly about that based on my years of experience here. The pricing of the things don't make sense. It is not, short-term renting is not an income maker. It purely offsets the cost of owning a second home. So these second homeowners are either going to leave their house empty and use it when they want to, or they're going to rent it out while they're not using it, but they are not going to not buy it. So it may just be a different second homeowner that's buying that house. The prices are such in that way. If we want to focus on workforce housing, which I strongly think we need to do, I think we need to be putting that effort into specifically workforce housing and not trying to figure out how to regulate other things to make it happen. So that's my little rant on that, but it was a very interesting realization these last 2 years in seeing the different caliber of people buying these homes versus, you know, the Denver couple whose kids in ski school at Ski Cooper on the weekends. They're not buying those second homes anymore because they did need that to help offset the cost, but now it's these guys from California that use it 2 weeks a year. So I just need us to be cognizant of that like, whether we do these regulations or not, like that's the shift that's happening in our community. And if we want to make it so that the second homeowners and the people that are here are the ones we want here, I think we need to be aware of that as well. And stitching the fabric together. The other thing is I do think that short-term rentals are a huge help to us when we do need lodging, but those are, you know, sporadically 5 months out of the year, whereas hotels and motels in town, almost everyone, if not everyone that I know, has to offset their costs by long-term renting several of their units. And I think that works for them because they're all relatively small and they can make that work. But if you recruit a Marriott or somebody here that wants to employ 70 to 100 people, where do those people work from September to December? You know, what do they do? And so I just think there's a lot of things out there that aren't being considered as far as some of the pros. I think we have to mitigate the negative impacts that short-term rentals have by continuing to have these conversations and have these regulations put together so that there is good enforcement on violations, so that if each year we need to add a new rule to mitigate those impacts on neighbors and community, then we continue to do that, but that's what I got.
Agreed. So I would concur with that. I think the enforcement element is, you the nail on the head for me. That is a little vague. I think if there were some processing steps outlined that said this is the types of things that would happen. 1 strike, you're out, 2 strikes, whatever the strikes are that you're out, or what the ramifications are, citations or otherwise. I think that's extremely important. The rules themselves, going through the code, I think are fairly adequate. You know, the question is who you contact, and then where's the process after you contact to get movement on it, right? And I want to concur with what you're saying. I agree 100% with that. So.
Question, the required inspections for septic systems are 3 years, but you're allowing a 5-year start or a 5-year previous start. What's the thought process there?
Now, if you have an inspection that's 5 years or newer, so by the time that you would renew for 2026, you would be in that 3-year cycle. It's allowing some time for currently licensed. 5 years, 3 to 5 years is what's recommended by the EPA in order to properly manage your septic system. So we wouldn't be going beyond 5 years, but we think with short-term rentals and the increase of maybe users that aren't familiar with septic systems, the risk could be heightened, and that's why going to 3 years, but we wouldn't be exceeding best practice by the EPA.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if staff can speak to a couple of comments about a percentage as opposed to a number cap, and decision rationale around number as opposed to a percentage. And then also the comment about incremental increase to like 175 over a certain year, and if there was thought about that in the process.
So based on the difficulties the cities have had on trying to do a percentage and figuring out exactly how many dwelling units are occurring, there's been, I think that Joey could probably talk to this as well, the cities talking about going to a straight number versus a percentage, because it's easier to manage than a percentage. You could tie increases to the rate by which building permits are being issued. So if you want to kind of look at adjusting based on a percentage, I think that staying in a number and then adding at a rate of X amount of building permits per the county might make a lot of sense. Like, you know, increasing when we, I don't know exactly what that ratio is to suggest, but I do think that that is a model that we've seen in other communities too, where they have increased based on the production of new housing units. And the code, the policy that you have in front of you does suggest that whatever amount of licensing might be adjusted, so it already calls for it within the language that you have, that it could be fluid, it could be adjusted accordingly. So, you know, there's a little bit of space in the policy that's before you, but yeah, there is a policy, or there's a practice out there already that adjusts based on new housing stock.
The reason for using a number rather than a ratio is because it's difficult to get specific information from our assessor's office. It's what we ran into with the city as well. So you go with a number, a specific number, which is easier to manage, but it's based on the ratio you're trying to get. In this case, if we did 171, it would be based on 6.3%, an increase over 4.7% of the 107. It's easier to manage, and it still is it's still based on, it's based on something. It's not just a random number. So,
Well, you
trying to
could-
get a percentage of houses.
You could argue too that like there will be small infill building, you know, there will be a slight percentage of increase over the next few years, but any kind of major development, you know, so if you say this K, we passed, for instance, you know, now a certain cap, you would say this, it gets revisited again in 5 years. The cap number is recalculated and based on what's happened. Like, for all I know, yeah.
And that's exactly what the city's looking at. The city was very hesitant to put in an automatic increase. But this would trigger, if we had a significant increase in building permits, it would trigger revisiting this number and then justifying an increase in the future or justifying not increasing in the future. But it would be triggered by an increase in housing stock.
I might also suggest that, you know, when I went into moratorium at 127, you know, kind of heightened interest in short terminal licenses, and to be at 118 right now versus maintaining that cap through the moratorium. Some of that's attributed to property owners that did not meet the grace period, and so some of them are the ones that are waiting now to be able to restore their licensing. But I do think that it's a bit telling that 127 licenses were eligible for renewal during that cap period.
The other piece that spoke to me a lot tonight with Dorothy is the primary license situation. It makes sense to me, your criteria for eligibility for that. I just happen to know that, for instance, the LT 100 lottery, how many people provide some sort of documentation to make themselves look like what the locals to get into a race. So if there's no licenses available, for instance, and there are unlimited primary, and the big one to me was, and I'm sorry, I forget your name, Kyle mentioned, is that if the cap gets met and you have these unlimited primaries, I can see where somebody would say, okay, hey, I'll rent you my house, but you're gonna leave every time I have a resolution. I'm gonna give you this great rent, but I'm still gonna make money off of you, and you're gonna manage my short-term rental. So, not to say that I think that's gonna be the norm in a lot of it, but I can see where, and this just pushes me into the option B category, because I think if there's reasonable room to move around in here, I think with the appropriate enforcement and complaint process for folks mitigating impacts, we won't have the need for people to either go underground with it and or deal with that primary issue. If there's room in the cap to move, and knowing that at any time that the BOCC sees that there is a problem with the short-term rental situation, we can revisit this conversation all over again. So if right now we were to vote for some room in the cap, and then a year from now it's out of control, we can come back and revisit the cap. But I think that would at least alleviate some concerns that I don't think will happen that often, but definitely people will try to sneak the system with the primary situation, I think, as far as trying to have staff manage that. I can see that being an issue. And the title transfer with family was the other thing I started, that I know is a question of the city too. And did you, in Derby addressing that too, that if,
I'd have to look at the policy. I took that I don't think that the draft or the policy that you have includes, I think it just says, transfer on sale. I don't think it's
It doesn't put carry on
I would be for that, simply because just recently we had, a family who lost, well, the owner of the home passed away. The family who's inheriting the house, it's tied up in probate. They have some family members trying to make the bills work, and they can't have their license transferred or something, there's some kind of issue with that. So it would be, to me, if it's a title transfer within the family and it's legitimate, that to me, I don't. That's me personally.
Is there a clean way to prove up the legitimacy of the title transfer within family?
Well, I think, so I think the policy already says sale. A transfer of title doesn't have to be a sale. Transfer of title in a probate situation isn't a sale.
Right.
Right.
So
Maybe just like, so if they sell it to Grandkid, he's got to.
They have to go back through the process.
But
But
if
if it
it's
is
given
truly
to
a
them,
family
or it's
transfer,
a family transfer.
then you can maintain that license through the transfer.
Correct. Thank you for clarifying.
And Jason has a comment.
Jason, go ahead. Jason,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I just wanted to make comment on the section, I believe it's J, item 15 around open fires. And my concern is there's just not enough language there. While I understand that, septic systems can, be detrimental to the home or its users of those water sources around them. Wildfire risk mitigation is, I think, also a priority we should be looking at, especially for out-of-towners that are, occupying the short-term rentals. For example, there was nothing in there regarding charcoal fires. It's not explicitly prohibited, but it doesn't say that it's allowed either. And so just wondering if there was a reason for not tightening that up, or if there is some controls or language that the state uses regarding wildfire risk mitigation and making that a part of the fire check for the rental.
There's no reason that the planning commission can't recommend any kind of language modification if you so choose. So no open fires. We did talk about this at the work session. Joey might have been the only one that was participated in that, but during that discussion, we did talk about various different items, but you certainly could make a motion to adjust any of the language that you would so like to adjust.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the stuff is to me like a gas, one of those gas fireplaces on the back deck.
Yeah, that's, we asked, we did talk to the fire marshal, we did get, their input and they said, the fires were of the greatest concern, to prohibit those, so we did, refer the policy to them for direction on inclusion of, prohibition of open fires.
So to ban open fires, to ban or prohibit open fires for fire pits? Or do we want to
I think
specifically?
he's specifically talking to charcoal, so that says wood, that's wood fire, outdoor wood fires, and if you wanna include charcoal, you could draft a motion to include charcoal in there, and staff can make that change if you'd like to.
Right. My concern is if you say that wood fires are not permitted, that are you stating that charcoal fires are permitted? Because it does say gas or propane are allowed. But just because it doesn't say that charcoal fires are not allowed, and it doesn't say they're prohibited, I just want to make sure that that would be clear on whatever's decided.
Or put it in terms of spark generation, because that's really the concern.
Exactly, it's, you know, nothing that generates a spark.
Right.
So to prohibit fire pits or open fires using any fuel other than gas.
And I think the spark, or, yeah, however you want to word it.
Just trying to.
Right. So if you're considering charcoal to be a spark generation, I could also say somebody's hamburger could generate sparks if they don't know how to cook properly, right? So I just, you know, I just think that language should be tightened up somehow.
You're also saying no charcoal grills. Like, I guess that's the question to me, so it's like.
I don't know how to clarify that.
You just need to include it, I just think you have no wood open fires or charcoal grills.
Well, and grills typically are okay with the fire marshal because they're a contained source, there's a lid that you can close. So I think if we maintained it at fire pits or open fires.
Yeah, so number 15, the way it reads right now is no outside fires. Outside wood fires are prohibited. It shall be the responsibility of the owner or property management company to ensure tenant compliance. Outside gas or propane grills are allowed. Which grills is separate than fires. So,
And then also to include that if there is an additional ban by the sheriff's office, that would supersede this. If there were just.
Regardless, whether you're a short-term rental
That's
or anything.
yeah.
That's automatically included.
Yeah, so if instead, the number 15 reads, you know, open fires, outside wood fires or charcoal fires are prohibited, it shall be blah, 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 outside. Well, I mean, do we even need to put outside gas or propane grills or allowed?
No outside fires, period. What if you took out that next sentence entirely? No outside fires. The second is redundant.
So then you can't have gas fires in because that's an outside fire. So if instead it says no open fires,
no outside open fires, or
right, because isn't an open fire defined
no
as one
outside
that's not
fires
in
of any fuel
So-
other than gas.
Yeah, they provided me with the language of wood, so, open, they, whatever, however you would like that to.
And what if we just very specifically went to Jason's comment and said outside wood or charcoal fires are prohibited?
Yeah, they're another statement.
You can strike the rest of it if you don't like it.
And then, well, I like the rest of it, and then I'd say outside gas or propane grills or contained fireplaces are allowed, fire pits. Right, gas fire pits will be allowed. Not just a grill.
Maybe if you were to say that you know, grills that are intended for the purpose of cooking food.
Yeah, I mean, we can wordsmith this to death. I think we have to do it based on what the normal public is gonna read this as.
And I would propose, once we come with the new wording, we go back, that's the fire. Just to make sure that we're not.
Sure.
doing anything.
Keep in mind that, we have really tight, our moratorium expires on Wednesday. And so we are attempting to bring a recommendation before, so staff can try to, if you give direction that you will be fine with whatever the Lake County Fire Rescue approves. I can make sure that that's within the language that goes to the board.
Okay, so we can add that language to the condition, the language for this. No outside wood or charcoal fires the rest is good, and then outside gas or propane grills containing fire pits are allowed. Or, yeah. Right?
Outside gas.
So you're referring to a gas-fired fire pit or grill? Right. Okay, so you mentioned gas or propane-fired fire pits or grills. Yeah.
You see, if I got this right, so we're striking the first word, not outside fires. We would say outside wood or charcoal fires are prohibited. And then the last sentence, outside gas or propane grills or contained gas fire pits are allowed.
Yeah.
Is that clear enough?
Yep, like it, easy. Okay. Back,
Sorry,
no, go ahead.
Jason, does that make sense?
Yeah, that helps clarify that, I think, and it doesn't leave a whole lot open for interpretation, which I think is better.
Thank you.
I would, so I think the big, I guess if there's any other comments and or discussion pieces before we close public hearing for county commission, did you have anything you want to add, Sarah?
I just have a couple of things, thanks for wordsmithing that, I think it's worth maybe looking at that state or deed transfer, but I think we figured out that it said specified sales in the language, so that was addressed. Perhaps the county versus the Colorado inspector language, and pull that back up to look at that.
So, I think what they're talking about is inspector, and the question to me was engineer. So I was stating a Colorado engineer can do that evaluation. An inspector is somebody that's registered with Lake County. So I believe that was the correction of the statement. It was not, and again, that's, the zoning just says that you will, abide by, that you have approval from Reg 43. But the question before me was whether or not, any engineer, and I said a Colorado licensed engineer could evaluate, the impact from a seepage pit, which David, that aligns, right? So it's not a clarification, it doesn't need a change, and it's not within the zoning code.
Okay. And you may have covered it in your opening presentation, Anne, but I wonder if it's just worth the quick clarification on the septic, because the concern, I don't know if it seems that with the change or the regulation prohibiting seepage or leach fields.
No, seepage pits.
Seepage pits, sorry, from being allowed a short-term rental license. That won't affect all property owners with septic systems. Only
No.
those with seepage pits.
Correct. We found, don't have exact counts, but, based on the records within the office, we believe there's 17 properties that have seepage, 23.
17 are incomplete records, 23 records of seepage pits. And some of those.
Can I ask for a clarification? What is the difference between a septic tank and a seepage pit? Is it one and the same, or is there some?
So I'm gonna stop you just for a minute, because public comments closed, but.
Well, but I'm trying,
David's,
yeah,
but
trying to
so-
get that clarification.
Yes, but David, if you wanna help us out with that, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So a septic system is typically comprised of a septic tank and a soil treatment area where the wastewater leaves and starts entering the natural environment.
You're talking about laterals that come out from the septic tank.
Yeah, so a seepage pit is a type of soil treatment area. It's a type of leach field. Those are kind of general terms, but a seepage pit utilizes a very deep field or pit as opposed to a shallow area that treats the wastewater.
Okay, this doesn't answer my question, but that's fine. Because I was always under the understanding that a septic tank was part of it was a tank and part of it was a leaching field with laterals that ran from it.
Yeah, so the seepage pit would be that field, and that is what is being, it's an outdated non-effective way of treating the wastewater. Everyone definitely has a tank, unless they're, from the, 1800s or something like that. So the tanks, every septic system in the county has a septic tank. Some of them additionally have seepage pits as their method of treatment and dispersal. And that,
Which I refer to as laterals.
it's different. But I would be happy to chat with you after.
Sure, absolutely.
I'm not sure that really much better.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, like, we don't have regulation over that, right? Like, this code can't, it's gonna just say that that septic system has to be in compliance with Lake County. And then whatever they get to decide over there is gonna be in their court.
Yeah. And then I think I just wanted to comment, I can appreciate the modeling or projection to assign the overlay, but I can't help but think that that method is a little bit flawed in not considering a neighborhood feel of our subdivisions. I don't think that we've done the work to figure out what exactly that percentage looks like per neighborhood. And I don't know if that's really possible. But I do feel like there should be some language in our regulation that addresses or implies that monitoring, we will monitor this and as far as like saturation of licenses, because higher density subdivisions are actually our neighborhoods for folks. And I do worry that even though there doesn't seem to be the high demand, we don't think if we increased it by 50, we'd get 50 applications. I feel like maybe there's something a little bit more to do in preparation or to set that expectation of not wanting this to just go kind of haywire and oversaturate any one subdivision or neighborhood. So I'm sorry I don't have a resolution for that and to offer now, but I would be curious about maybe any continued conversation around that. And I because of that, and also leaning towards, I don't think short-term rentals, I think my concern of applying this regulation might be equal in, I don't think it's going to create a ton of long-term rental housing, but I'm also as equally concerned about the commercial investment and development, and what message that puts forth for prospects in the county. And I really want to be sure that we have appropriate investment and appropriate commercial lodging throughout the county. Meaning, maybe more hotels or motels. And let's see. I would currently lean towards not increasing the cap to monitor this very closely over the next year or two. And because I think we will have a gap in some people who will no longer remain eligible, there'll be enough of vacancies there of licenses to meet current demand or what we might expect in the near future. And I'm also intrigued, and I like the proposal of that incremental increase, but I appreciate the perspective from the city. I think actually the city, in my opinion, should have higher cap than the county because of its concentration and accessibility in those places that we want to encourage long-term residents to live, but without control of that in the county here, I would lean towards a slowly increasing in general.
And just offer one bit of information. Another aspect about the community housing overlay is the density. Those lots are significantly different, smaller, They're generally 0.17 of an acre in West Park, whereas the neighboring subdivisions not only have a higher cost point, but are considered, quarter of an acre or half an acre, or greater in size, so the density within West Park. So having 19 there is one of our, all the mapping does show the saturation and the levels of use, and so it is one of our highest saturation areas, and based on density and size of lots.
Any other comments within this public hearing? I don't know, is Kayla or Jeff still on there? Do you guys have any other further comments before we close public hearing? I will entertain motion.
I do not, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
That moves to close the public portion of the hearing.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay. So just so everybody knows now, we're gonna go into our discussion phase and then we'll make a motion to decide what we're gonna recommend. to our commissioners.
I heard your.
So you're welcome to stay. You're welcome. Oh, you can stay. You're welcome to stay. If you wanna go, yeah, we can stay in here, what we decide and what we're gonna put forth to the commissioners. You're welcome to stay, we just can't. Sure.
So one thing that, I did hear from both the planning commission and the board, is potentially you'd like some work around some stronger enforcement. So what I would suggest, if that is some direction that you'd like to give to staff on working on policy, is potentially a recommendation. You know, if we can get to a place where we can move forward with recommendation, but, you kind of alluded to that a little bit, Heather. If there's work that you would like us to continue to work on the policy, and you think that there needs to be, or any other member of the planning commission thinks there's more work that needs to be done, we're just really trying to beat that moratorium deadline.
Yeah, and I think what we could do is put a timeline on, and say, we're gonna do this with the condition that we approve, enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, I do appreciate the moratorium coming up, but I do think there needs to be a little more strengthening around the enforcement aspect of it. Because people are going to need to know who to go to, what is the general process. Don't take that to specifics. Don't necessarily have to tell them, here are the ramifications, but.
No, but I agree that if let's just say somebody has a terrible occurrence and it goes to the commissioners and the commissioners revoke their license, if we have no standards put in place of how you can get your license revoked, then they have
An open door.
an open door to come back to us, right? So we've
how
got to
would we-
have a better.
How would we word that condition? Approval with the condition that enforcement.
That an enforcement policy, enforcement/violations policy is drafted and accepted by VOCC by some kind of date.
So I don't think it's part of your motion. I think it's
Just a
that
direction.
you direct staff to go back and say, this is something,
So it
that
doesn't
you
need to
think
be part
that,
of the
that there could be additional, work put into, like, you would commit to a work session with the board and staff on working on the enforcement aspect of the policy.
Which is what we've just done, and therefore we don't need to include it as conditional.
Correct, I would go
Understood.
take your recommendation and then, and say.
But it doesn't need to be stipulated, it's just that you're well aware that everyone's concerned about proper enforcement and proper and consistent and clear enforcement.
Absolutely, I mean, keep in mind, staff is definitely, the zoning official is, commissioned with ensuring compliance with the code. So it would be an administrative review when there's a complaint, like it generally always has been, but you're right, there's no criteria by which they can rule on, other than, and this is the language, yes, and the code itself, but you don't have findings, you know, necessarily that need to be made in order for them.
Right. But I think that what would be helpful to the community at large is that it's super clear to them what the process is. How do I make my complaint? Just because throughout this process, I feel like there's been some very crazy complaints that I've heard about things that I feel like have never been brought to the county as a complaint. But the stories that I've heard in some of these town halls, I'm just like, what? Well, did you tell somebody about that? You know, and it's like, but instead they're letting everybody know, you know, how terrible their neighborhood is because of short-term rentals. So I'd rather there be a very clear, communication to the public of, if you feel like your neighbor's short-term rental is causing a problem, these tenants are doing something, this is who you call, this is the submission, it's super easy, you email and you say this happened. Just so that even if it may not actually change the way you guys have done it, it's just the communication to the public is, here's the process, we're gonna take your complaint seriously if you ever make one, and if there's complaints against a certain owner, our process is this to then therefore revoke their license.
And that would include feedback to the complainer so that they know that something was followed up.
Yeah, so like coming up with that kind of.
So I would say that, you know, that already exists in our office. We have on our website exactly where you can file a complaint. We've hired code enforcement. We have, you know, we're making an offer to a new code enforcement officer. So code enforcement is overseen by our department. We have an online portal where you can electronically submit your complaint. So maybe it's that we, you know, like hearing tonight, oh, in my neighborhood, there's a couple unlicensed rentals. Well, we've gone through every rental site, we've done compliance, but if there's something we're not catching through compliance, because I would tell you right now, I feel like, you know, we can't react to something we don't know about. So unless we've received a complaint of an unlicensed STR, you know, we have an ADU application that the neighbors alluded to the same, but again, after that hearing was over, even though we reached out, we didn't get any complaints. So we can't investigate too, I guess, to a certain degree, like you said, you've heard the things.
So if that is in your portal, and the process is defined to the level we're talking about here, maybe that's where the change would need to be, and not necessarily what we're trying to prove tonight.
Yeah, agreed.
I have no problem with that. So.
So now the big question is multiple choice, folks, A, B, or C.
And it can be a variation thereof. You know, it is definitely, you know, as the pure example of the city, as if we increase you know, what kind of carrying capacity has the city maintained, and we use that as guide.
I absolutely agree with Heather's point that she made earlier, that not having a license available doesn't mean somebody's not gonna buy the second home, they're just gonna allow that second home to sit vacant when they're using it. So I agree very much for option B.
I see no problem with I would not go with C. I don't think it can go unregulated and unmonitored.
Yeah, completely agree, yeah, absolutely.
Follow staff's recommendation of option B, and vocalize that in our training we heard that what's actually been effective recently has been incentivizing workforce housing, and trying to figure out what the way to do that is, but I think it's worth having a cap.
Yeah, having a cap, but you're right, workforce housing is truly a separation.
And I think some of the things that Sarah brought up about monitoring or worried about different subdivisions, I mean, and I think that this is something that we've always struggled with when we're doing code amendments, is that this thing we're passing is gonna be here forever. And that's just not the case, right? So like, if it starts, yeah, I mean, if the county commissioners get, or we get a bunch of information that, oh my gosh, Silver Hills is suddenly turning into 50%, then we could be like, oh, shoot, we need to go back and redo this, you know, so I just think that,
And that would be an interesting exercise if we do increase the license limit, still based on a reasonable percentage, and we do see a change in some of these adjacent neighborhoods where we need to look at percentage occupancy, then that's the point at which we can move forward with that. West Park is an obvious case. These others, I agree with staff, and I think that they are not ever gonna be inundated with short-term rentals, but at the same time, if we see that change, that's something that we can act on very quickly.
yeah, I would be really leery of saying, this subdivision gets this many and this, just because I think then you're almost saying, yours is a second home subdivision, yours is a primary subdivision, and I just am not sure that that's our goal with this community. I think the idea is that everything kind of.
I don't know that that's gonna prove up. If it does, we can address it.
Right, I agree.
And that definitely follows, you know, just kind of being mindful of a lot of pending litigation over short-term rentals in different communities.
Yeah.
You know, staff has been really careful on not being overly specific, you know, we can call out density, we can call out price point, we can call out access. But once we start trying to target different subdivisions, it becomes much more difficult to do that in an equitable fashion
And it's
without
hard to
basis.
defend. It's difficult to defend unless you're using a monetary approach like you're talking about, median income, whatever, and something like that, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the perfect community has everybody living everywhere cohesively. Obviously, there's some windows and that, but, you know, rather than over here, we have this group, over here, we have this group. You know,
And Lake County, more than any other adjacent community, actually does have that. We do still have a reasonable range in every neighborhood. We're very lucky there.
All right, so, Jason, you still get to have a little bit of, say on here. Did you have any thoughts on A, B, or C?
Well, first, I just want to say it's been an awesome discussion and kind of watching the community come in and bring all their different points of view. So I think that's been great. I think the staff have put together a wealth of information that makes it a lot easier to, you know, figure out the best choice. That being said, after everything that I've looked at, I think option B is, you know, first up for my picks, because I do see the need for, you know, providing that availability. And I think that just the option A with the lower cap and leaving it there doesn't allow room for how the community is changing and its needs. And I think option C just leaves it a little too open. So I think B is the kind of the best of everything at this point, because something, you know, obviously needs to be decided. So that's all I have to add.
Interesting. So on this recommended motion, where do we insert that option?
So you can, the policy as it's been provided is the 170. So you can just go ahead, so it's just, you would have gone to the condition. Otherwise, you still may want conditional if you want to amend, the fire, clause, regulation or standard. But that would be your only change or whatever changes.
So if we read the conditional approval, it still
What
automatically talks about option B.
That's how it's written, yeah.
My understanding is that we have two changes to the approval. The first is to include transfer of license through transfer of title only. Or transfer
No,
of title.
we don't have to change it because the language already says just, say it.
So,
And it doesn't talk about transfer of title.
Okay, so we don't need to include that.
No, just,
So the only
just the
one we
fine.
need to change is paragraph 15.
Correct.
Very good.
Sounds like you're all ready to go.
I'm just trying to keep up.
I know, I'm so excited to be in the motion.
Are you ready to put this to bed?
I sure am.
All right. Edwards makes the motion. Should the planning, well, let's see. Edwards moves the planning commission recommend approval of file number 24-02, a code amendment to sections 5.2.18, 5.2.18.1, A through L, in chapter 9 definitions to the Board of County Commissioners with the following conditions. That a resolution be prepared to memorialize the condition. The decision. Condition 1 would change point 15 in the motion to read, outside order charcoal fires are prohibited. It should be the responsibility of the owner or property management company to ensure tenant compliance. Outside gas or propane grills or contained gas fire pits are allowed. And make the following findings. A, that is conditioned, the proposed amendment is consistent with the goals, objectives, policies, and other provisions of the Lake County Comprehensive Plan and this code. B, that as conditioned, the proposed amendment is necessary because of changing social values, new planning concepts, or other social or economic conditions. And C, that is conditioned, the proposal is within the best interest of the health, safety, and general welfare of the general public.
Have a second?
second.
Any discussion on the motion? Okay, can I do a roll call? Edwards,
Yes.
Tucker,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Lynn, yes.
Jason?
Yes.
Jason?
Yes.
Thank you. And motion carries, so now it goes to the county commissioners, and they can choose to accept our recommendation or not on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Absolutely, and the recommendation, what, that you feel, do you feel like there's anything that can be done in the policy, or do you think that we need to just continue to, educate the public and make complaints, do we need to work?
For the
on
enforcement piece, you mean?
Yeah, for the enforcement piece.
I would like there to be a little bit more clarification on, like, if you get it, yeah, the process, but like also like, if Stevens over here has 4 complaints this year, that should be an automatic, goes to the commissioners for a hearing. You know what I mean? Like, just something that like
Some
kind of
numbers
says,
that, so that.
lets the neighbors know that like, oh, well, we told you about it, thanks for listening, but now they continue to have it with every tenant and you're not doing anything because.
A time frame for, for Joe, the time frame for getting back to the complainant. Those kinds of guidelines have to be similar. I mean, I don't think anything policy, I think that the website's totally.
Even just being on the website and stipulating the complaint process, what a complainant should expect from the process.
Right.
Just a clarification on that website, which is where everything would go anyway, would satisfy me.
As well as outlining potential, let's say, because there's no case it's going to be the same, potential ramifications if the owner is found negligent or whatever in a particular case.
Negligence is a good word.
And that would be a complaint about an unlicensed or an unruly or any of those things would happen.
Any violation of the code that we've written, because the code that we've written, the rules are pretty good. I like them. And so, it's just making it clear, not only to the complainant, but to the owners. They go to the website, they know, here are the things that can happen. I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but these are the things not limited to can happen.
Well, then there needs to be some jeopardy or nobody will pay any attention to the rules.
Exactly.
Great, staff can work on this, and we have our work session and just kind of go over that code amendment that's coming. We can have, some ideas for your next work session.
That'd be great, thank you.
And I'm sorry, I know you said this at the beginning, what's our first March meeting?
For the 11th?
It is the 11th, but what is the,
What's on the agenda?
what's the, sorry, what's the?
So it's just a work session on the code amendment. It's pretty easy code amendment. It's just that we're making, the first finding in almost every application is that it's consistent with the comp plan. We want to expand upon that and make it all the other duly approved policies that we're creating in the next little bit. So that if, you know, that we just make sure that we don't have those policies or those studies and work, like housing needs assessment that's in on the Shelter Road desk. We want to make sure that we're applying them to every development application. Now, staff would do that kind of automatically, but it also is very predictable and explicit for a developer that comes into. They know that they're going to have to consider the wildfire mitigation plan. They're gonna have to, you know, our transportation plans, things like that. So we're just gonna make sure, so it's.
Streamline businesses.
Yes.
I will be out of town that day, but I can likely Zoom in, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm out of town too.
So the second one is the,
AW.
right, AW two.
Yeah, that will be a big one, and we'll
Please,
be
everybody,
to you.
please, everybody be there for that.
Yes, but if you can give us just an hour on the 11th, like if you're remote and if we just have an hour, I'm sure we can knock out anything to do it, we might even be able to do it sooner.
Okay.
I'm also out on a work trip on the 11th.
Okay, so I guess we'll, is it
Maybe
work
do a
session?
tally quick or something.
Oh, you don't need it. We don't need a quorum, so, we might even talk about just sending out a report that gives you an update on compliance, those short-term rentals, and just gives you kind of the background of the code amendment that's coming forward to you, and that might be enough, so we might reach out with just like, you know, here's your report, if you have questions, reach out to staff, let's discuss it. Because we wouldn't be taking any decisions at that meeting anyway, so we would need a quorum.
Okay. Well, thank you for all of you that are still on Zoom and in the room. Thank you for participating in the public process. Super helpful for everybody to be involved. Again, in case I wasn't clear earlier, now our recommendation goes to the commissioners for a 1 o'clock on Wednesday?
Actually, 9 a.m. It's 9 a.m.?
9 a.m. commissioner meeting on Wednesday morning, and they will make their decision based on our recommendation. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Seconds.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, it's very nice. Thank you.